Okay. All right, everybody. Welcome to session 2. I promised you last time that we would now discuss the means by which freedom can be made a reality, so that it's not just a beautiful dream that we can yearn for, but we can actually experience freedom, which again means to walk around this world pursuing your own values, your own goals, your own beliefs, your own opinions, your own purposes, and not being forced to submit to the will of other people. So how do we do this? What technique can we use to actually allow for the exercise of freedom? Well, the answer is, I'm going to give you the answer first and then I'll explain what it means. The answer is the establishment of what we call the rule of law. There's a famous 17th century English philosopher named John Locke. And Locke says, who was very influential in shaping the American Revolution and our subsequent political order. But Locke says, where there is no law, there is no freedom. The way that we protect and preserve freedom is through implementation of law. Now when I first heard this when I was an undergraduate, I thought, oh, that's ridiculous. There are so many laws that actually violate our freedom, force us to do things against our will, rather than allow us to exercise free will. But that was my misconception, and it's a misconception many people have today, because remember, as I mentioned, so many of the concepts of our moral and political heritage have been distorted into and transformed into things with vastly different meanings than held by the people of the 18th and 19th century and for centuries before them. And the word law is an example. Where there is no law, there is no freedom. But when they talk about law, a law refers to a particular kind of rule, and not what today is so commonly termed law, but should rather be termed legislation. Law and legislation are not the same thing, as I'll show you. So we want to talk about what a law is in order to understand how law protects and preserves freedom. Let's go back to our example of the guy pointing a gun at your head and demanding your wallet. Okay, that's exactly what we want to prevent or minimize in society. We don't want people jumping out of bushes every 5 minutes, forcing things upon us by threatening coercive behavior. So we want to minimize that. So if we're serious, how do we do that? Well, the answer is, maybe you've thought about it, maybe you already have the notion. The answer is we establish a law. For example, we could pass a law, we could put on our lawmakers' caps or our legislators, as we do it in our political order, and the legislators can pass a law that says, if you put a gun to an innocent person's head and demand their property, you are going to face a very negative consequence. You're going to go to jail, you're going to lose your liberty. So as lawmakers, what are we doing? We're fighting fire with fire. We want to minimize the possibility of unlawful or arbitrary coercion, such as people putting guns to your head and demanding your wallet, and we do it by exercising what we consider to be a lawful and moral and good use of coercion. Because by passing a law that says, if you hold up people at gunpoint, you're going to jail, you'll lose your liberty, we are engaging in an act of coercion. We are deliberately narrowing the options of would-be criminals as follows. You pass a law. If you engage in this behavior, holding people up at gunpoint, you're going to lose your liberty and go to jail. We have the options now confronting would-be criminals are rob people at gunpoint and risk going to jail. They don't want that. Or refrain from robbing people at gunpoint. And they don't want that either by definition. They want to engage in that kind of behavior. But we have now said, no, that's not an option. They want to do it and not have any consequence. But the passing a law eliminates that possibility. And why are we passing the law? Because we want to force the coercer to do what we want them to do, which is not hold up people at gunpoint, rather than what they want to do, which is to hold them up and not be penalized. So we are acting as it's a true act of coercion, a law. Every law, let me mention, a law is not a suggestion. They're not suggesting that you don't put guns to people's heads. There's a coercive penalty attached by definition. So please remember that. A law is never, it's not a suggestion. It always has a coercive sanction attached to it. But we think that, that kind of a law is used for a good or moral purpose. Yes, we are coercing would-be criminals, but we're doing that in the interest of protecting the rights of peaceful and innocent people so that they may walk around this world without the threat of being molested or being assaulted. And so we use, we fight fire with fire. We fight the bad coercion with good coercion. And so that's one of the reasons, as I said in our last session, we're never going to have a society of perfect freedom. Perfect freedom would mean the perfect absence of coercion, and that would not be desirable, because coercion, the good coercion of law, is the way that we protect the freedom and other rights of citizens, so people can walk around the world and actually enjoy freedom. So this is why Locke says, where there is no law, there is no freedom. Because how free would we be, he says, if every Tom, Dick, and Harry could jump out of bushes at will and threaten us to force us to do what they want rather than what we want to do? We would not be free at all. We'd be constantly subjected to the arbitrary will of other people and could never pursue our own goals, values, and purposes. And the way that our tradition has hit upon the means through which we protect this individual freedom is through the rule of law. Now, there are two possible sources that can threaten our freedom in everyday life. On the one hand, other members of society, private people, can threaten our freedom. They can jump out of bushes and come over and put guns to our heads and demand our wallet, which we feel compelled to turn over against our will. In order to address that, our tradition has developed what is called private law. Private law relates to the relations between two private persons, me and the would-be criminal, right? There's regular people, two private persons, and the private law consists of rules of just conduct about how we are expected to treat one another at the level of private person to private person. That's called the private law. But there's a problem. Private law is not self-declaratory or self-adjudicating or self-executing. Who does those things? Who declares the law? Who enforces it? And who adjudicates cases of conflict? Well, the answer is the government. So this is where government enters the picture. I'm sure most of you, when you signed up for this course, at least had some remote idea that we'd probably be talking about government, and we will to some extent. The government is the agency that administers the law that protects our rights. We'll get into, in chapter 3 of our book, we will get into an elaborate discussion of exactly how that relationship came into being in the Lockean and American understanding. But for now, I can say that government presents another problem, because we establish government to administer the law that protects our rights, the private law, as we've just talked about. But that creates another problem. And the problem is one that the framers and founders were deeply concerned with. And that is, how do we prevent the government from exercising its power, not to protect our rights as it's supposed to, but rather to turn around and violate the very rights it's supposed to be protecting. This has happened from time immemorial. From the study of history will show you that the abuse of political power has been a constant in human life from time immemorial, and it will be there until the day that life on this earth is over. This is the problem of human nature, as we shall see, that's not eradicable. It cannot go away. The potential, what the framers called the lust for power. And so the framers understood this quite clearly, and so you have to be alert. All right, so we need a government to administer the law that protects our rights. But at the same time, we also have to do something to prevent the government from violating the very rights it's supposed to be protecting. And how do we do that? Well, they're very consistent conceptually and logically. The answer, once again, is the rule of law. Only in this case, what's enacted is called public law. Rather than the private law that governs the rules of just conduct among private people, we establish public law. And public law deals with the relationship between the government and the individuals in society. not two private individuals, as in the private law. Public law deals with the relations between the people and the government. Now, the chief documents of our public law are, of course, the U.S. Constitution and Bill of Rights, but there are many, many, many others. There are libraries full of books on administrative law and public law and so forth. But in all cases, public law governs the relations between the people, the individuals, and the government. So the way that we address the two possible sources of threats to our freedom, private people and the government, is through law, private law and public law. Now, as I mentioned at the outset, we need to be careful here because a law is a very special kind of rule that we have almost in our society lost the understanding of what true law is. We call all kinds of things law that are not in fact true laws. I mentioned legislation, commands, directives, regulations. There's all kinds of things emanating from government that do not have the moral status or moral dignity of law. So what is a law? We say where there is no freedom, where there is no law, there is no freedom. Okay, well, what's a law? A law is a particular kind of rule that all of you as Christians will understand quite clearly. A law is the best way to understand a law is again through an example. The Ten Commandments. You know, they're called commandments, unfortunately, but they really aren't commandments, they are laws. Most of them, not all of them, but the majority of the Ten Commandments are actually in the form of true laws. Think about and they all have a certain structure, a similar structure. Think about the Ten Commandments. What's the most common structure of the Ten Commandments? Now, there are some exceptions, but the majority of them are stated in the form of a negative rule, a prohibition. Thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not bear false witness, thou shalt not covet. Your moral obligations are negative in the sense that they are fulfilled by the absence of something, taking away of something. No stealing, no lying, coveting, etc. This, as we shall see, the biblical morality is at the foundation of our legal system in the West. And so the moral substratum that underlies our prohibitions of murder and theft and perjury and all the rest is the biblical worldview. And we'll get into that much more in the third part of this course. But for now, you can see how a law against murder is in the same form as the commandment not to kill. It's a negative morality. In the same way, a true law is generally speaking a negative rule that prohibits certain actions on our part. It doesn't command us to do things, but it instructs us not to do certain things. The best definition of a true law, it's a general standing rule, usually negative in character, that is known, certain, and universal. It applies to everybody, like the Ten Commandments. Doesn't matter who you are, what your background, race, gender, class, none of those things make any difference. This is a universal standing rule that in intention is perpetual and that is universally applicable to all persons. What do we mean? And the key phrase here is a general standing rule. A general rule means that the prohibition of murder applies to everybody. It doesn't apply to certain classes of persons and all the rest of it. Everybody, from the garbage man to the president, is prohibited from taking innocent life, from killing others. All right. So it's a universal law. It's intention. It's perpetual. This is what a standing rule means. Just like the Ten Commandments are standing rules, they continue to apply to us over thousands of years. It doesn't matter. And we expect them, certainly as Christians, that they will apply to us for eternity. They are perpetually enforced. No matter how many times a particular rule prevents a bad action, prevents a murder or stealing or lying, It's never exhausted or executed. Next morning, it's still in place in the exact same way. It's a standing rule. That's what a true law looks like. It's a general standing rule of just conduct that we expect other people to treat us a certain way, and we are required to treat other people a certain way. Thou shalt not put a gun to someone's head and demand their wallet. That's a general standing rule. It applies to everybody. No matter how many times it prevents such an action, it's never executed or over and done with. It's the standing rule tonight and tomorrow and next month and the next 100 years as it was for the past 100 years. That's what a true law looks like. The framers of the American tradition, the Constitution of Massachusetts expresses quite clearly the dominant view of the era. It says that the purpose of this Constitution is to create a government of laws, not of men. In a free society, human beings do not govern other human beings. Instead, the law governs everybody. The law understood as these universal, general, standing rules of just conduct that are to apply to everybody, private citizens and government agents alike. All right? That's what it means to have a general standing rule. And in societies that are not free, Hitlerite Germany, for example, there were many others. Who did the Nazis, the Nazi followers of Hitler, when they took their oaths of loyalty? What were the oaths of loyalty? Of course, we all know. We've all seen the movies. Heil Hitler, right? They were obliging themselves to follow their Führer, the leader, Hitler, a person. That persons govern persons in unfree societies. In our tradition, it's the exact opposite. When the president or any government official takes the oath of office, who do they pledge? Do they pledge? Does the Secretary of State pledge to obey Joe Biden, for example, in modern times? No. None of them do. There is no personal obligation. Instead, what does everyone do, every government official, when they take the oath of office? What do they swear to defend and uphold? The U.S. Constitution, the law. The law that restricts their own powers in theory, right? But it's because in a free society, the law governs and men don't govern men, right? And so this is what a government of laws means, and not of men. So in theory, it shouldn't make that much difference who's in office, because everybody, in theory, is bound by the same higher law, the same rule of law, the rules of public law, as embodied in our Constitution and Bill of Rights and other crucial documents and so forth. So the way that we protect individual freedom, in short, is through the institution of the rule of law, declaring the law, adjudicating it, and enforcing it or executing it. And we'll see that's the task of the three branches of government, respectively.